Hey guys, welcome back. So this is part 3 on this 8500 watt LiFan generator. I picked this up originally as a parts machine. The engine was stuck, or at least mostly. It could be rotated, but only with extreme force. So part 1 was spent disassembling this engine, and ultimately the cause of the issue was the connecting rod. I went on eBay, found a replacement for only $18, and in part 2, I put this engine back together, and things were going pretty well until I got to the valves. I noticed the exhaust valve was missing a rotator cap, and I couldn't find that cap anywhere inside the engine. So I think that is what caused the failure of the connecting rod. At some point that cap fell off, went into the engine, got chopped into bits, and made its way between the connecting rod and the crankshaft journal. So we got that rotator cap replaced and then realized that the push rod retainer was worn for the exhaust valve. So with a worn retainer, it allowed that rocker to move out of place, and that is why the rotator cap fell off, causing all the issues with this generator. So got all those parts replaced, and by the end of part 2, we got this engine to fire up, but it just exposed another issue. The decompression system on this is not working at all. This should have about 60 psi when trying to pull start it, and this one is coming in at 110 psi. So we do still have issues, and I think I know what it is. I actually don't think it's the camshaft. I think it's something with the exhaust valve itself. So I'm going to get you set up a little bit better. We're going to pull that valve cover back off and see if we can't figure this thing out. I'm also going to pull the spark plug out just so I can rotate the engine without any resistance. So if I rotate the engine, you can see we have the exhaust valve opening, no issues. Intake's opening, now it's closed. And we're just starting the compression stroke. So if I keep going, we should see that exhaust valve move just a bit, and it does. So I think the compression release is working on the camshaft. What I'm very suspicious of is this valve spring retainer. When putting this back together, I noticed the valve stem was very low in that retainer. So I think we have an issue either with the valve or the retainer. I ordered up a new retainer. I'm going to try to install that now without removing the head. So what I'm going to do is actually put a little bit of rope in the cylinder. I'll rotate the engine to top dead center, and what that'll do is two things. I guess first, it'll make it so the valve can't fall in, having it at top dead center, but it can fall in some. And that's going to make reinstallation of the retainer pretty difficult. But with the rope in there, I'm hoping it'll actually hold the valve up tight, and that'll make it much easier to do this without removing the head. So let's get some rope in there, we'll get it to top dead center, and we'll try swapping out that spring retainer. Just trying to minimize the chance of this rotator falling in the engine. So this here is what I'm talking about. This is the top of the valve stem. And when you put the rotator cap on, the edges of the cap sit on this lip that's right here. And this valve stem is not much above the level of that lip. And the rotator, it's probably going to be impossible to see, but it's pretty deep. You know, you need that valve stem to go in there quite a bit. And the way it is right now, it really has no chance. So let's get that off and get the new one on. I've got both valve spring retainers here side by side, and I think you can tell which one the new one is and the old one. The one on the left is the new one. There's a lot more material there to hold on to that valve. And the one on the right, most of that material is missing. And I'm surprised, actually, that it was holding on to that valve at all. So let's get the new one on. I think this will fix our issue. These valve spring retainers have a flat side. Those should be facing down. If you do it any other way, then the rocker is going to make contact and it's going to start kind of wiggling this thing around when opening and closing the valve, and that's going to cause wear similar to what we see here. It looks a lot better. I'm not going to set the valve clearance exactly right now. I just did it based on feel, and we're definitely in the ballpark. So I'm going to get the battery reconnected as well as the compression tester and do another compression test. Beautiful. We are at 60 PSI, and that's where we should be. So I think I dodged a bullet on this one. I thought for sure I'd have to open that engine again. I'm just about done prepping this engine to get the power head reinstalled, and usually all I have to do is fill a cylinder with rope to lock up the engine, and that'll let me torque down the rotor. But for this one, I actually need to stand this engine up vertical to get this power head reinstalled. So I drained the oil out since there's a good chance that might spill out of the breather anyway. And I've also added a strap just to help hold things still. I'm going to leave the engine in the frame. We'll just tip the frame up on its end, and we'll use gravity to our advantage to get the power head reinstalled. And this one's a little more difficult because the end housing isn't attached to the stator. Usually it is with a couple bolts, but for some reason there's no bolts on this one. There are holes both on the stator and the end housing for those bolts, but just no bolts. Anyway, I think I'm ready to go, so let's get this power head back on. On the generators I get, most rotor bolts come in 2 diameters. It's this one, which is the smaller of the two. It's about 8 millimeters, and the larger one here is about 10 millimeters. This is the one that came on this generator. These I usually tighten to 30 or 35 foot-pounds, and these you do not want to go over 23 foot-pounds. Anyway, I don't usually see Loctite on these threads. This one may have had some, so I'll put a little Loctite on there just to make sure, and we'll torque that bolt down to 30 foot-pounds. I couldn't find any locating pin on the stator, so it's really up to me to position it the right way. And it doesn't have to be exact. It'll work no matter what position it's in. I think the bigger issue is just making sure the wires for the AVR are on the top left, the main legs coming out top right, and then the bottom is where you have like the charge circuit and the power for the fuel solenoid. Yeah, I didn't get the alignment quite right. I have to rotate it just a bit more to the right. Yeah, that should work. going to pull the engine over like this. I want to see that the rotor can spin freely without making contact with the stator. The rotor spins, it's not making any contact with the stator, so we're good to proceed. I'm just going to attach these mounts right here, and then we'll put this thing back right side up. Oh, so close. It's starting to look like a generator again. Anyway, I'm going to get some oil in it. I hate leaving engines without oil in it. It's just asking for trouble. There's a lot of wires going on down here, but give you the quick rundown. What I just connected actually brings power up from the battery into the control panel. So when you hit start, it then sends the power down and trips the solenoid. As far as other connectors here, we have the idle control, the charging circuit, the low oil shutdown, and this is the coil itself. So you got to ground that out to kill the engine. So I'm going to hook up this switch. This is the grounding wire right here. It connects there. And then these wires here, one goes to the ignition switch and the other the low oil module. I'm not going to bother tidying these wires until we know everything is good, but it occurs to me, this switch here is redundant. We have a switch over there, which is the on-off and the electric start. So with this one here, you actually need to have both switches set to on, or else the generator's not going to run. So this is just going to cause confusion. So I'm going to eliminate that one. When you wire a stator, you want to make absolutely sure you know what leg 1 and leg 2 is. Also, the wires going up to the control box where the outlets are, 2 of those wires are dead short. You want to make sure you know which wires those are and make sure they are on separate legs, because if you put them on the same leg, it's essentially shorting a leg out to itself and you're going to destroy your stator. In this case, I have pictures of exactly how this was before I took it apart. So don't take this lightly. You get it wrong, you're going to destroy your generator. We're in the home stretch. Not much left, really. Just the carburetor, which has to be cleaned, so we'll do that now, and the battery. This carburetor is fairly clean and will probably work, but if I don't clean it, you know it won't work. That's pretty much it. There's not a whole lot to these carbs. I think the big thing to look for is just making sure the jets and the emulsion tube are nice and clean, and the little passages here on the side. Gonna test the fuel solenoid, want to make sure it works. In generators, these function very differently than in tractors. In tractors, you actually need to energize it to retract to allow the fuel to go through the emulsion tube and the main jet. Generators, this is normally retracted both when the machine's off and when it's running. The only time this deploys out is when you turn the switch off. The engine's still spinning, the generator's still making power, and some of that power is sent into here. And once the engine spins down, this loses power and it goes back to its resting position. And the reason why they do that is so that you can pull start the engine. Tractors are always electric start, but a generator, even if it has electric start, they usually have pull start. So you need to have this ready to go in case the battery is dead. Yep, works fine. I want to start this before finishing up. Unfortunately, the weather is not cooperating, and this is the only chance I'm going to get, really, for the next week. So I'm going to start it real quick here in the garage. Got the fuel tank hooked up, as well as the light. So we'll get this going just long enough to see that it makes power and that everything continues to sound good. Now, I did back the governor spring tension off a bit, so it is going to run slow, but hopefully it'll run fast enough to see if it makes power. All right, not too bad. It started right up and the power came on. Now the engine speed was slower than I thought it was going to be, so I did increase the governor spring tension to get this at around 60 hertz, and it was already at about 120 volts. So things sound good. I have no reservations about finishing this up. So let's get the airbox on. We'll close up the power head and get that tank reinstalled. Unfortunately, the airbox that came with this generator is all busted up, and the cover doesn't really stay on too well. So went onto eBay, picked up another one, brand new. It was about 20 bucks, and this one's metal, so it shouldn't break. I don't know why. This always surprises me, but they don't include the hardware. You need 6 bolts to kind of tighten that down. Unfortunately, I only have 2, so I'll put those 2 in for now. I'll have to make a trip to the hardware store later and come back to this. All right, and then this tire. Haven't really talked much about it, but the tire on the other side is perfect. There's no issues, no rust. This one was rusted pretty bad. I took some of the rust off, and it doesn't look terrible, but this tire, it's a foam-filled tire, but it has a huge flat spot. It's not too easy to get this thing around. So I do have another tire. It is actually a tube tire, but I think given the condition of this one, we'll swap it out. As far as the battery goes, this one I actually purchased for another project and ended up not needing it. Now, this cranks this engine fine. The issue is that there's only a brace going across here, and because the battery's so small, it's just free to move around in there. Anyway, I was trying to think of a few ways to secure this, and I think probably the easiest is just to use these Velcro straps to hold things down. I'm just going to put this back for the next guy in case this is ever replaced with the proper size battery. Besides the airbox, this thing is done. So I'm going to make a trip to the hardware store. I'll finish getting that airbox together, and I'll turn you on in a second for the load test. Pretty much ready to go. Got the fuel tank hooked up and 4 space heaters on standby. So we'll get this thing started up, let it warm up a bit, and then I'm going to apply a 3,000 watt load. See how that does. And if everything goes well, I'll double that to 6,000 watts. Not too bad. It started second pull, and once running, I could tell the engine was slow. So I double checked it. It was at 60 hertz, brought that speed up to 61.5, and then loaded it to 3,000 watts. And things did pretty much perfect. It held at 120 volts, 60 hertz. I then doubled that load to 6,000 watts, and it didn't do as good as I would have hoped. I mean, ideally, it would have stayed above 58 hertz. In this case, it was 57.2. So there's a few reasons for that. I guess the first one would be that the engine is out of horsepower. So I went over here and I just manually worked the governor and opened the throttle plate. I wanted to make sure that the engine could get back to 60 hertz, and it did without issues. Then I opened it a little more and got it to 61 hertz without any issues. So I'm not down on horsepower. It's really a governor sensitivity issue. And there's a couple things you can do to combat that. I guess first, you can up the speed. So without a load, I could bring that no load speed up to 62.5 hertz. Or alternatively, I can actually move the governor spring where it sits on the governor arm. You can just see it right there. So a lot of governor arms have multiple holes for that spring to go. And in this case, there are two. The further in you bring that spring to this governor shaft, the more sensitive you'll make that governor in response to a load. So I could move that in, readjust the speed, and potentially that could solve the issue. But I've never seen on this style engine that spring anywhere but where it is. And I even double checked the footage from when I took this generator apart just to make sure I put the spring back in the right spot. And I did. You know, that is where it was intended to be. So I think I'm going to leave good enough alone. I mean, I am miles ahead of where I was. I mean, this was basically destined as scrap. And now it is a good running machine. Now, before you comment, I did replace those bolts in the airbox, so that is complete. And despite the model number, the 8500 IE, this is not an 8500 watt generator. It's rated at 7500 continuous watts. So we were close to the max. Theoretically, I could put a fifth space heater on it, and that would bring it right to the max. So it would actually exceed it a little bit, because these heaters are a little bit more than 1500 watts each. Anyway, this one was a long video series, and I wasn't sure where it was going to go. You know, given that this is a Honda clone without parts support, parts numbers, or torque specs, I wasn't sure I was going to attempt to rebuild this one. But in the end, I think it worked out pretty well. So I hope this video helps someone. Thanks for watching.